Hey everyone, I am so excited to share this episode with Kayelee Rose today. Kaylee is going to be speaking at Embodying Eve, which is coming up a month from tomorrow, so be sure to register if you haven't already. Kaylee is going to be speaking at the retreat on the topic of intuition and how we as women can tune into that intuitive sense that we have to receive revelation, get guidance for our family, understand our own gifts and propensities, and the ways that we can expand in our role as women to embody our femininity and to bless others around us. So, very excited for her topic. Today, we're talking about something similar, a little bit adjacent to that, that has to do with our physical bodies as women and using those to attune to who we are and our intuition. So, this is a great conversation. Again, if you haven't already registered for Embodying Eve, please do so. It's going to be incredible. We have amazing speakers lined up. We're going to be doing some sacred geometry, some yoga, breath work. This is going to be a really incredible transformative event, and we hope that you'll be there. If you have any questions or concerns, please reach out. We want to help you get everything squared away so that you can participate with us. All right, all that said, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Latter-day Disciples podcast. I'm excited to be joined by my friend Kayelee Rose. Kaylee is a feminine embodiment coach, astrologer, and subtle energy practitioner who is passionate about helping purpose-driven women cultivate inner peace, belonging, and authenticity while reconnecting with their inner wisdom. As the creator of Resonant Astrology, co-founder of the Feminine Alchemist online school and community, and co-host of the Feminine Alchemy podcast, Kaylee teaches women to align with their feminine energy and the rhythms of the universe for deeper self-compassion, healing, and empowerment. Kaylee lives in Idaho with her husband and 6 children, where they homeschool and seek to grow, learn, and love through both light and shadow. Kaylee, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So, those of you who don't know, we have our women's retreat coming up on February 22nd in Kaysville, Utah. It's an all day event from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., and it is going to be so awesome. We have many speakers picked out, all discussing topics from my book, Consider Yourself as Eve. The event is called Embodying Eve. So, we're learning how to take the principles that are taught in the book and really bring them into our own individual reality and our own physicality. And Kaylee is one of our presenters who's going to be speaking in the afternoon, and I'm so excited to have her. She's going to be talking about intuition. And so we wanted to have the opportunity beforehand to introduce her to you and maybe lay a little bit of a foundation for some of the things that she's going to talk about by sharing her own story. So, with all that said, Kaylee, would you mind telling us a little bit more about yourself and how you were led to such a unique and very feminine ministry as what you're serving in right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of a hard question to answer. There's so many parts and pieces, so many things that added up to bring me to where I am right now. But one of the main things, one of the threads that kind of weaves through everything is that I have always felt extremely drawn to Eve, even as a little kid, and just completely enamored with her. She was like my hero. And I always had this perspective of, well, Eve didn't make a mistake. She followed her intuition. She trusted that somehow things would work out, even though she didn't have all the information. And I believe she was incredibly courageous. And so I just absolutely loved her. And I have this art project from high school. It's a book that like we had to glue a book together and then cut out the middle. And it's actually, I know most people won't be able to see it, but it's Eve. And um, I just was so fascinated with this idea of there's more information than we have, and sometimes we have to take a step out into the dark in faith. And I've had to do a lot of that in my life, a lot of emulating that very Eve quality of courage in the face of not having all the answers. Um, and there was a period of time in my life where everything seemed pretty bleak. My marriage felt like it was kind of rocky. It had gone through some massive transformations a few years prior. Um, but we were back in this place of like, what is going on? I felt like I was kind of losing my mind. I kept having severe issues with depression and anxiety, but at the same time, I was having, I guess you could say, my intuitive gifts opening back up, which was intimidating because I was starting to sense spirits and receive communication that I wasn't used to receiving. And it was just like very confusing in a lot of ways. And I was attending massage therapy school. I was pregnant with our fourth child. And I kept having these experiences where it was almost like I was on the verge of blacking out, but instead images would flash through my mind. And it felt like deja vu, but there were images that I was like, there's no way I could have ever seen these in my life. But then as soon as the episode would end, like I couldn't really remember any of the things that I had seen. And these episodes would be accompanied by panic and almost terror. And they started happening more and more frequently. And I was like, what on earth is going on? And doing a lot of praying and asking, like, is something wrong with me? Am I losing my mind? Like, what is happening? And just receiving a lot of comfort, but not a lot of answers. And finally, there was one day that I was supposed to go have a session with a mentor of mine who was teaching me a lot of things about connecting with my intuition. And she texted me and she was like, I don't know why, Kaylee, but you need to stay home today. And it just kind of like hit me in the gut, just this very strong sense of, she's absolutely right. You have to stay home today, Kaylee. Don't go to that session. And thankfully, my husband had work off that day until the evening. And so he was home when I had a grand mal seizure. I stopped breathing, my lips turned blue. I mean, I don't remember this, but he said it was pretty scary. Um, and it was scary. Like I came to being wheeled out in a stretcher. My little kids were around. My mother-in-law had come over to try to help. And I was just like, what on earth just happened to me? What This is so insane. And it was also scary because I was pregnant and we weren't sure like if me not breathing for a while was going to impact the baby. And so that whole experience, I ended up on a few medications because they were like, well, you probably have some form of epilepsy. Like, we've got to check into that. And I just kept feeling like, no, I don't have epilepsy. I don't know why I believe that, but I just had this strong sense of I don't have epilepsy. And I was on like the lowest possible dose of this particular anticonvulsant possible. Like, it was hardly even considered a therapeutic dose. And I was having like no symptoms, no signs of impending seizure. And the medication that I was on is known for causing severe depression and potentially suicidality. And I started kind of falling into, not kind of, I definitely fell into this deep depression, to the point where I just kind of wanted to give up on life, even though I was pregnant. But I didn't want my baby to not have this experience of being on this planet. And so it was a very confusing time where I simultaneously wanted to be here and didn't want to be here. And at the time, I didn't realize how much it was the medication that was actually influencing that. I just thought, man, I've had some issues with depression off and on. Like, it's just really bad this time. And and I remember praying for help, praying for support. Like, what do I do? I can't keep going like this. I can feel that I'm losing the will to live, and that's terrifying. And I was led to have this conversation with my unborn child, and I actually like was able to communicate with her spirit to spirit. And she essentially said, like, I'm not sure that I want to come after all. Like, I don't know if I really want to be born. And I was like, no, you have to come. You have to be born. You have to have a body and have all these beautiful experiences and hard experiences of being on this planet and being in a physical body. I don't want you to miss out on that. And she was like, well, you want to miss out on the rest of that. And I remember just being like, wow, I am getting called out by a spirit that is much older and wiser than I anticipated, but is still my unborn child. And it was a very sacred experience. And I remember saying to her, "What do I need to do to help you stay here?" And she said, "Teach me how to stay. Show me." And that I made her that promise, like, okay, I will stay here and I will teach you how to stay if you will also come and you will stay here and have this experience. And um, that particular promise ultimately saved my life later on. And I'll get to that in just a minute. But there's a little bit more backstory before getting to that, and that is that um, I ended up having a few experiences where the neurologist that I was seeing just kept saying, like, you have temporal lobe epilepsy, even though none of the tests are showing that you have anything wrong with you. Like, you just have to have temporal lobe epilepsy. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had this grand mal seizure. And I just kept feeling that's not right. That isn't right. And I don't know why, but it's just not right. And at one point, I was praying and just seeking guidance, like, what happened to me and what do I need to do about it? And it came very clearly this sense of, like, Kaylee, that was your body processing a lot all at once, like a ton of trauma, a ton of past experiences. And it almost felt like pre birth experiences. Um, and that was like, when an animal shakes after a traumatic experience, they're literally processing that experience in the moment. And it was interesting to think about, like, oh, in that seizure, like, I was shaking out all this trauma and stuff. And I remember asking, like, do I need to know what I processed? And it was a very clear, like, no, you do not need to know, and don't try to find out. Like, you really need to not go there. And I was like, okay. Interesting. um but then it just kind of confirmed for me, like, no, I don't have temporal lobe epilepsy. And a few months after that fourth child was born, I fell into a really deep depression again. And I was like, why is this happening? I don't understand. And by that point, we had discovered that, yeah, the medication was probably exacerbating things or contributing a great deal. And I got to the point where I started having a lot of suicidal thoughts and just not wanting to be around at all and feeling like my family would be better off without me. And it was really scary to me. But at the same time, I couldn't quite shake it. And ultimately, I came to a point where there was one day where I had a plan and I was going to act on it. And I remember standing in my kitchen and my baby was asleep on the bed in my bedroom. And my other kids, I think, were playing downstairs. And I picked up my phone to call my mother in law to give her a rehearsed reason why she needed to come over and watch my kids so that I could leave, so that I could go kill myself. Except I wasn't going to tell her that. I had this fabricated, very plausible reason for her to come over. And as I picked up the phone to make that phone call, um, I got this spiritual nudge. And I looked up, and it was almost like I could see through the wall that separated the kitchen from my bedroom. And I saw my little girl laying on the bed. And I heard her voice in my head, "You promised me." And I burst into tears. And but I dialed my husband instead of my mother in law. And I told him, "You have to come home. I have a plan to kill myself, and I don't want to do it, but I'm scared that I won't stop myself." And that was one of the hardest things in my life I've ever experienced, but also one of the most beautifully humbling, to recognize how much God was looking out for me and how much my child was looking out for me and how much I really truly did want to live, even though there was some part of me that didn't. And I ended up going through an intensive outpatient program where, like, I did therapy. I think it was 3 or 4 times a week, and it was kind of intense, but it was really beautiful. And while I was going to this, I just kept having this really strong feeling, Kaylee, you need to get off the Keppra. You need to get off the anticonvulsant medication. And I had heard so many stories from my neurologist about like, you can't just come off of it or you'll have a seizure. And like, once you've had a seizure and you have temporal lobe epilepsy, like you have to stay on the medication the rest of your life because you might have another seizure. But I just kept feeling like, no, I have to get off this medication. This medication is going to kill me. I have to get off of it. And had the spiritual confirmation that I would never have gotten to the point of suicidality without the influence of that medication. This is not me saying like don't take your medication. This is not me saying medication is bad. This is just my particular experience with a particular medication at a particular point in my life. But I just kept getting that nudge. You've got to get off the medication. And I followed my intuition and I followed divine insight and I slowly weaned myself off of the medication and had no side effects, no signs of impending seizure, nothing remotely like that happened. And I actually took my last dose, my last like partial dose, in time to get pregnant with my fifth baby, even though that was not the plan. And it's just really interesting that the timing of that worked out in that way, um, because the medication like wasn't a fantastic idea to be on when newly pregnant, and um, it just felt like this very divine, like, okay, there's the perfect timing for everything. And I had ended up also on an SNRI, an anti-depression medication. I can't remember the technical term, but I was on that after that. And I kept feeling the sense of like, you need to get off that too. And I was a little scared, because I had been suicidal not that long ago, and that was a terrifying experience. Um, but it suddenly dawned on me that I was not processing my emotions, that I felt incredibly numb and disconnected from my body. And it was harder to even hear my own intuition. And so I weaned myself off of that medication too. And even though it was scary and logically it didn't make sense logically, like, no, you should stay on that medication, no, you should do this, you should do that, but I trusted anyway. And coming off of those two medications um, kind of coincided with a further opening up of my intuitive gifts and a further, I guess, willingness and ability to follow my own intuition. I discovered through a journaling process that I did every day that the vast majority of the struggles that I had with depression and with anxiety were related to me being just energetically too open and picking up on everything going on around me. And that when I felt completely overwhelmed and I didn't want to be around and just couldn't function, it was because I was carrying other people's stuff. And so I was guided through this process of like writing down every emotion and every negative thought, and then intuitively figuring out, like, okay, how much of this is mine? And the vast majority of the time, a very small percentage, like 10% or less of each thing, was actually mine to be dealing with. And I was able to let go of those things. And it was a long process. It took place over several years of finally getting to a point where like I rarely feel depressed. And when I do, it's very short lived and it makes sense. Like something hard happened and it's not actually depression, it's just me grieving. And looking back, I remember one time specifically where I just felt so overwhelmed by sadness and anger and sorrow and just felt so horribly depressed. And I remember praying to God and saying, like, why is this still happening? Why do I still feel this way? And is it going to be like this my whole entire life? Like, what do I need to do? And just feeling this overwhelming sense of peace, even though there was most of me feeling this horrible turmoil. The peace made no sense. There was no logic to it in that moment. But I just knew, like, okay, I'm going to be okay. I don't know what okay looks like exactly, but I'm going to be okay. And it wasn't very long after that that I came to this, like, I don't know, turning point in that journaling process where I very rarely experienced the horrible feelings and the horrible thoughts that I had previously experienced off and on for much of my life. And having that experience and being able to follow my own intuition and follow divine guidance, like weaning off of medications and not experiencing the emotional turmoil that I had been experiencing, it led to a lot of really sacred experiences with getting to know Heavenly Mother and with being guided to essentially education, to programs that taught me about connecting with my own body. And for most of my life, I kind of resented my body. It felt like a liability. It was like, why do I have to have this thing? Like, I know I'm supposed to have this body so I can become like God, but like, really, do I actually have to have this body so I can become like God? And I was led to a couple of somatic trainings, and breathwork certification, and just these things that I was like, we don't have the money for this. It doesn't make sense for me to do this, but deep down, I know I have to do this. This is the next step in my healing. And diving into those somatic trainings, really connecting with my own body, learning to forgive myself, but also learning how my body is my dear companion and how it's powerful and it's a helpmeet for me to fulfill my purpose. Like I knew that cognitively before, but I didn't feel it in my bones like I do now after going through all of that. And now I'm here, I'm in a very different place than I was 2 decades ago, even a decade ago. Much more at peace with myself. And like I started out life being very harshly orthodox, I guess you could say. I was incredibly hard on myself. I had to do all the things and I had to check off all the boxes and I had to do it just right, or somehow the atonement couldn't apply to me, even though I knew that that wasn't actually how it works. Like, that's not doctrinally sound, but I still was so hard on myself. And through following my intuition, through having the courage to do things that don't necessarily make logical sense, through trusting that God has my back, through following Eve's example, I'm now in this place where I am much more nuanced. I don't know that many people would call me orthodox at this point, but I have a very close relationship with my heavenly parents and with Jesus Christ. And I feel so much peace compared to what I used to experience. And I have a deeper understanding of the doctrines of the gospel. But I also, like, I'm an astrologer and I do all these things that other people look at and they're like, okay, that's either weird or evil or just made up. And yet I was guided intuitively and spiritually to these things. And they have opened up my ability to see myself and other people with compassion and to see how we each have a different path. Like, yes, the path is the same, yet at the same time, it's individual to each of us.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like I've talked an awful lot at this point. So if you have questions or anything you want to add, I am definitely open to that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and for being so open and vulnerable
Yeah.
about those hard things. I can't imagine what all of those things felt like. But I so appreciate you sharing, and I know that there are people in our audience who will relate to you and understand you and your story. So thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different directions that we could go with all of that. I think I want to talk a little bit more about this body connection and emotional
Mhm.
processing and sort of the somatic and like the breath work, the skills that you gained as you attuned yourself more to that intuition, right? And like
Mhm.
our intuition, this is how we gain revelation, right?
Right.
Especially for us as women. And it can be very physical, more so than even mental. And I think that that's really important and maybe something that is worth each of us studying out, because I think we're kind of raised with maybe this idea of like, oh, a revelation is like an idea that you get in your brain. And like sometimes it is that, right?
Yeah.
But this connection to our body and like being in our body. I love how you said like you knew that it was important to get a body because that's a part of the journey of becoming like God, but like really, is it that important? I think we
Yeah.
do spend so much of our time viewing our body as an enemy, especially as
Absolutely.
women, especially as women. Like we have so much in our external environment that encourages us to hate and disassociate from our body.
Hmm.
So, can you talk about that aspect a little bit more? And what were some of the things that God was teaching you about your body and the importance of your body in regards to your spiritual development?
Yeah. So, one of the biggest things that God has taught me over the past decade is that if you aren't connected to reality, you're not going to be able to change anything. If you're
Mm,
dissociated, if you're trying to pretend that you don't feel how you feel, that you're not actually going to get anywhere. And I spent a lot of my early life pretending I didn't feel the way I felt because it was bad to be angry. It was bad to feel resentment. Like I had all these emotions and sensations that I had labeled as bad, including sensations that a lot of people might consider to be sexual in nature, but aren't necessarily sexual. They're just sensation. And so I would shut them down. I would pretend they didn't exist. And that resulted in me having a lot of unprocessed emotion, because emotion doesn't disappear. There are actual molecules and actual energy involved in emotion. And if you don't process it, if you don't feel it and then let it go, it lives in your body and it can contribute to all kinds of health issues and just all kinds of difficulties. But if you pretend you don't feel how you feel, that's almost the worst version of that. And God essentially taught me, like, no, you have to feel what you feel. Even if you're mad at me, even if you have to scream at me and tell me you hate me and you wish that life were different, he can take it. And our Heavenly Mother can take it. They can handle our true emotions. And this isn't me saying, like, you should go rage at God just for the fun of it. But if you genuinely feel anger towards God, you have to feel okay with that. And you have to say to yourself, or at least feel it, okay, I'm angry. I feel that. I feel that. And usually, once you allow yourself to feel something, it goes away. It's not
mhm,
there anymore if you allow yourself to truly feel it. And so I was led through this process of essentially reawakening physically and emotionally, by first of all, letting it be okay to be angry, letting it be okay to um, feel frustrated, letting it be okay to feel sad, um, and also letting it be okay to feel happy and joyful. Like every emotion had to become okay. And that wasn't always easy. And there's even times now where I'm like, oh, I just shut that emotion down because I'm worried somebody else will notice I feel that way and then they will judge me. Um, but it's easier now. There's been an emotional awakening where I can feel what I honestly feel and I can witness it, and then that's it. And it
mhm.
becomes just information or just, hey, you had something come up and now it's all good.
Yeah,
Um, and as I
yeah.
processed emotional backlog of things that I had repressed, not that I'm perfect, there's definitely still stuff that needs to be processed, but it made it so much easier to hear the intuitive and spiritual insight that I was being offered,
Mm,
especially the insight that didn't come in words, the insight that I felt in my body, that feeling that, oh, I needed to get off of this medication, that feeling that, oh, you need to have this baby now, this feeling of you need to take that course. Like you don't know how you're going to pay for it, but it's going to work out. And those were felt things before there were ever words, before I
mm,
ever could conceptualize what I was being asked to do. I felt it in my body. And the
Mm.
thing about feelings, it like language in a lot of ways is very masculine. It puts labels and stickers and it categorizes things. And that's not inherently bad. It makes it easier for us to communicate with other people. But it can also narrow the possibilities of expression. It can take some sensation that you had and cut out all other possibilities but one. And our first language isn't with words, our first language is sensation. Our
Mm.
first language in the womb, in early life, is sensation. And so sometimes we feel things on a level we don't have words for. And because we don't have words for it, we assume that it's not there. We assume that it's not real. And in reality, there is a whole beautiful world underneath words that lies in sensation that can eventually give rise to words so that we can maybe communicate with other people. But at the same time, we can communicate without words. We can communicate by feeling something. I don't know. I imagine you've probably been in a room with other people and just felt that they felt what you felt, that somehow there was this shared feeling. And even the Holy Ghost, in a lot of ways, is like that, where there's this shared feeling. And we do try to put words to what we're feeling. We say there's a burning in the bosom, or there's like, I feel like I might cry, or I feel whatever. But sometimes we disconnect from the actual sensation by trying to label it instead of just be in it.
Mm.
And there's a lot of spiritual guidance we can receive that we don't yet have words for.
Mhm.
And when we process our emotions and connect with our bodies and become comfortable with not having all the answers, we receive that kind of guidance where it's like, I can't tell you what God just shared with me, but I feel it and it is very real. And
Mhm.
somehow it makes everything that was hard for me a few minutes ago okay.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, and I think, just what you were saying there at the end, like I can almost picture Eve that way. I think that I see some pushback in our community and well, not LDD, but like in the church culture and other places at the idea that Eve knew that she was supposed to take the fruit, right? And I think we see that pushback because when we say that or when you hear that, we think, oh, she like cognitively knew, like she
Yeah.
logically, analytically knew. I don't think that's how she knew. I think that she knew, like you said, in her body
Yeah.
of like my body, this brand new body that I just got is
Mhm.
telling me that fruit is for me. And
Yeah.
like, I don't understand that. Like, Adam, I don't understand it. But we got to take this fruit, right?
Mhm.
And she took it from the wrong person. That's my theory. I think that was the deception, is that she had thought she had been authorized by the correct person and it was actually an imposter. That's my
Yeah.
theory about Eve. But regardless, like there was still something in her that said that fruit is for you. And guess what? She was right. Like
Yeah.
she was right. She was the one who was designated to initiate mortality.
Mhm.
And so I think what we forget sometimes is that we, as women, as daughters of Eve, we have that same intuitive sense too. But it really does take this partnership between our spirits and our bodies. This whole idea about emotional processing is something that I've been learning more about recently too, because I think that, like all women, like we feel like our feelings are bad and like and they're too much, and the people around us can't handle them, and a lot of the times they can't because their parents didn't know how to handle their emotions, and so like we're
Yes.
dealing with a lot of like iniquity when it comes to holding space for someone to be angry and like not getting angry back, but just letting them be angry or letting ourselves feel sadness or feel anger or whatever. But I really love what you were talking about, that idea of like letting yourself feel it and then it goes away. And I think
Mhm.
that the reason why is because our feelings are chemical processes in our body that's trying to communicate something to us about what we need.
Yeah.
And that could be like, it's like you need to get to safety. I don't feel safe right now. is what your body's trying to communicate to you, or you're hungry. Like hunger is a feeling, right? You're
Yeah.
hungry. You need to eat something, right? And so we get this feeling of, oh, I'm hungry, I'm hangry, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so what we really need to do, exactly what we were talking about, is learn how to listen and like tell our body, okay, I hear you. Like I
Yeah.
hear what you do. And you don't even have to do anything really. Exactly like you said. Like this isn't a behavioral thing. Sometimes we associate emotion with behavior. And I think that's why we get the idea that some emotions are just bad. Like it's just
Mhm.
bad to be angry. It's just bad to be sad. Like all of that. And it's like, no, like it can be not productive to act on those emotions in a reactive, like unwise way, right?
Yeah.
But if you're just sitting there angry, like that's your body trying to communicate something to you. And especially with anger, usually it's trying to communicate you're hurt or you're afraid
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
something, right?
Or
And
that
so
there's
like,
been some sort of boundary violation.
right,
Yeah.
right. And so it's like we've got to give our body the space to say, okay, I hear you. Like you are trying to communicate a need to me, and I'm going to sit and I'm going to feel this because that's listening, right? Like that's how we listen to our bodies is by feeling our emotions. That idea of numbness, can you talk a little bit about that and how, as women, that comes into play when we have dissociated so much, and also how do we move out of that place of numbness that maybe we've put ourselves in from
Mhm.
denying our feelings for so long?
Yeah. So numbness. Often we feel numb because it didn't feel safe to feel what we felt before that. At at some point. At some point it became safer to at least believe that we're apathetic, believe that we don't feel anything. And um yeah, for some people, actually probably for a lot of people, it feels safer to feel nothing than to feel angry or sorrowful, to feel grief. And for some people it's safer to feel numb than to feel joy. There are times when we will not allow ourselves to feel those more quote unquote positive emotions, because we feel undeserving. And the thing about numbness is that, like, when we shame that, like, oh, I shouldn't feel numb, that's not a good thing, I need to change that, I need to fix that, that's not actually a helpful place to come from, because there's a lot of wisdom in our body, and a lot of wisdom in our, um, I guess, our neurological responses to things, because numbness in a lot of ways is our nervous system saying, hey, we can't handle all of this, so to survive we're gonna just be numb. And there's wisdom in that, even if it's not always helping in the way that our nervous systems think it's going to help. Sometimes it ends up not being helpful. But ultimately, our bodies are wanting to keep us safe and alive. And so shaming that is counterproductive. But instead, if we come from this place of acceptance, like, yeah, I feel numb, I don't feel anything. And then coming from a place of curiosity, like, and not even asking why do I feel numb, but instead asking how does that numbness feel? Where is it? Am I feeling it in my body? How, what sensations are with that? Because numbness has sensation with it. There are sensations, even though that seems almost nonsensical. Like if you're numb, you don't feel anything. But at least when it comes to emotional numbness, you actually do have sensations. And when we give ourselves this this space of, like, it's okay to feel how I feel right now, even if what I feel is numb, then it's like there's like this switch that gets flipped inside of us, that it's like, oh, it's safe to feel this way. Oh, I guess I don't have to keep feeling like this. If I, yeah, maybe I could let that go. And sometimes it takes time, especially if somebody's been through a lot of traumatic experiences, whether those are obviously traumatic experiences or ones that other people wouldn't necessarily consider traumatic. It can take time to feel safe enough to stop feeling numb. But the more we practice feeling whatever we feel, the better we get at it, and the wider range of things that we start feeling. And when I talk about feelings, I don't just mean emotions, I also mean physical sensations. So if someone finds themselves feeling emotionally numb, the best thing that they can do for themselves is to go outside or go somewhere they feel comfortable and start noticing, what do they see? What do they hear? What do they feel? Like, do they hear birds chirping? Is there wind blowing on their face? Can they feel the warmth of the sun? And starting to feel those physical sensations begins to tell your body, oh, oh, it might be okay to feel. And then you start opening up to feeling emotionally as well, and feeling more internal sensations that accompany emotion.
Mm-hmm. I like that last technique. That I think that's actually a technique, right? I hear that that helps quite a bit for people who have anxiety as
Yeah.
well as like a grounding technique to go through and say, okay, what are 5 things that I see? What are 4 things I hear? So, what do you know what the exact formula is? I can't quite remember. You're like
Yeah,
go
I
through
don't
each of your
remember. But
senses.
yes, you go
You
through
go
each
through
of
each
your
of your senses
senses.
and you identify like 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1 thing in each of those
I think it
categories.
starts with like the senses that you tend to notice more. Like I think it starts with
Mm-hmm.
what you see, and then it moves to like what do you hear, and maybe what do you, either what you feel or what you feel as far as like tactile stimulation, and then smell, and then like taste is the last, because we don't often, unless we're eating something,
Right,
taste more than one thing at a time.
right, right. Yeah, so that's a really good technique, that one too. So this is great. We're talking about different ways that you can do this, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, so creating a safe space to feel what you're feeling physically in your body and emotionally, right? And the
Mhm.
challenge about this, I was actually talking to a woman in our community about this recently. The challenge is to not fixate on the thoughts that might have triggered the feelings.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you fixate on the thoughts, like you're just going to go into a deep spiral. Like
Yeah.
your thoughts will keep feeding those negative emotions and create more negative thoughts. So it's not so much focusing on the trigger, but it's focusing on how is this making me feel in my body
Mhm.
and giving that space. And then yes, this grounding technique of going through and like sensing with your 5 senses, like what are different things that I perceive that can really bring you home into your body. Another one that I know you talked about before is shaking, right?
Mhm.
Like you talked about an animal that gets hit by a car and they get up and like they shake, and it's
Shake it
because
off.
they're literally like processing that
Mhm.
emotion. So like shaking your body, shaking your wrist, shaking your head, all of those things can help. Um, what are some other things that you found that can help with like emotional processing in the moment and then also like past emotions? Because I've had a similar like experience as you, as I realized that I hadn't been feeling my emotions for a long time, and I probably had this like super deep rage, like so deep that I didn't even know it existed because I just shoved it
Yeah.
down so far. And when I became aware of that, I was like, oh, well, I want to get that out. So I need to feel that. But like, how do I safely feel that? And like, do I need to remember why I got angry? And I got the same answer as you. It was like, no, you don't need to know why. Just like,
Yeah.
let's not open up a can of worms again. But like, just what are some other ideas for like processing emotion? Because this is a part of healing. Like, this is a part of repentance.
Mhm.
I think that this is a part of cultivating a broken heart, honestly, is like letting ourselves feel. Like, a broken heart is a soft heart, it's open,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to that hard heart is the heart that doesn't feel, the heart that won't let itself feel.
Yes.
So, what other strategies have you come across?
So frequently, people are afraid to feel because they're worried they'll get overwhelmed, that they'll have some big emotional outburst, or they won't, that they just won't be able to handle it. And so, some things that are really helpful are what I call titration techniques. So, it's just like a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time, instead of just like, bam, do it all and potentially traumatize yourself in the process of feeling all the things all at once. And so, with titration, there is very much this idea of, feel what takes you to the edge of your comfort zone and then stretches you the tiniest bit beyond. And some things that can help with that, whether you're processing emotion in the moment or processing old emotion, are things like breath work. And it can even be very simple breath work. It doesn't have to be super complicated, but also things that cross the midline of the body, for something called bilateral stimulation. And so, when, say, like your right hand crosses over to the left side of your body and vice versa, that's a form of bilateral stimulation. And you can just like hug and massage down your own arms as you're feeling whatever you're feeling. and that can help you feel safe enough and in your body enough to have the emotion and the sensation kind of unravel at a safe speed, rather than just feel like this massive wave. Walking is actually a great way, like just taking a walk, um, does a lot of bilateral stimulation, where you're using both sides of your brain at once. And there's just something about it that makes emotional processing easier to handle when there's some amount of bilateral stimulation going on. If you're feeling an emotion in the moment, whether it's something old coming up or something that's fresh, if it feels like too much too fast, focusing on your exhales. So breathing out longer or more forcefully, or just putting your intention on those exhales will help slow down the experience of feeling that sensation or that emotion, so that it happens at a pace that you can handle. Um, and if you're feeling an emotion that is more like of almost like a downer emotion instead of like anger or anxiety or something that feels high in energy, you're feeling something that's like, I feel incredibly sad, I feel deeply depressed. Focusing on your inhalations can help you process that. It's all kind of almost like breathing life into yourself, kind of that idea of, as I breathe in, it will activate my body and my nervous system more so that I can process those heavier feeling emotions. Whereas the focusing on the exhale is like, okay, I'm letting stuff out of me so that I don't explode.
Awesome. Thank you. I think your story is so great for illustrating some of the benefits that come from learning these practices and then following the intuitive guidance that you received to continue learning how to feel and connect with your body and all these things. I want to talk about some of the things that come when we do that work. As we talked about, I think that this is a form of repentance, and I think it is important for us, especially as women, to have that connection to help facilitate our spiritual growth and learning. I love how you talked about that this really helped connect you, your experience helped you connect to Heavenly Mother, to that feminine side of God. And the peace that came, I love that you said it was a peace that made no sense. And
Mm-hmm.
that is the peace that Christ offers, right? He
Yeah.
says that my
Yes.
peace is not the peace that the world will give you. And when I was thinking about that and what you were saying, I was thinking that that's because the world tries to fabricate peace based on external circumstances, right? Like if my house is clean and my kids are quiet and my husband has been nice, like then I have peace, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's not how Christ works. Like Christ teaches us how to have peace in our bodies and in our hearts when everything around us is not peaceful, right?
Yeah.
So, what are some of the other blessings and gifts and things that you've seen come through as you have done this repentance and like this personal work to cultivate your own broken heart and contrite spirit by feeling and being in your body?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things that has come through for me is um, being able to forgive myself for being human. Because I used to try to improve myself by being really hard on myself. And it just doesn't really work. Like it might seem to work for a while, but it doesn't work. And being able to actually like forgive myself and recognize like I did the best I could and it wasn't good enough, but it can be okay. The atonement is real. It actually applies to you. That's a really big thing that has come from just tapping into my intuition and into my body and into that connection with Heavenly Mother. But also being able to have compassion for people in my life who have upended my life. Like, there have been a few times in my life that my husband has completely upended my world. And um, it's been, it would be easy to just absolutely hate him and hate God for it. I mean, we're not in that place anymore. We're in a beautiful place and we have a wonderful relationship. And I played a part in that upending of my world too. It wasn't just on him. But um, being able to be at peace in my own body and at peace with the intuitive insight that I receive, um, I could see him with greater compassion, and I could not be so worried about him being a certain way for me to be okay. That he could have his journey and it could impact me, and I could still be okay. And I think that's going to come in really handy with my kids as they get older. My oldest is 12, my youngest isn't 2 yet. And we've got a bunch of kids in between. And I can already see ways where it would be really easy for me to blame myself for what they're experiencing. So one of my kids seems to have quite a bit of anxiety. And there have been moments where it's like, oh, that's my fault. They've seen me do that, or I've not been a safe space for them, or this or that. And being able to step back, one, have compassion for myself, and two, recognize that they are a person separate from me who is here to have their own experience, and that they are fully capable of being the steward of their own life, and that God has them. And I don't have to fix it for them, but I can show up as best I can. And I do that by being in my body, by feeling what I actually feel, by modeling having that broken heart and that openness to divine guidance. Like, that's how I heal my relationships, and that's how I support my kids in their own journey. Whereas before I did a lot of this work, I had a lot of fear and a lot of like, I have to fix it. I have to fix it. I have to undo the damage that I've done. And that's just not how it works. Everyone's here to have their own journey. And yes, we absolutely impact each other, but I don't have to be somebody's savior. That job is already filled, and it's filled beautifully. Um, I just need to show up and continue to learn and continue to experiment, because that's what we're here for. And I that didn't really fully sink in until I started connecting with my body and my intuition, and it was okay for me to feel what I honestly felt. And that's when the pieces started to fall into place for me in a very powerful way.
Hmm. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, this conversation reminds me a lot of Mary Magdalene and her account in the Gospel of the Beloved Companion, and this idea of being so grateful for Yeshua, for Jesus, because he helped make them fully human, right? And like embracing the fact that we have a body, embracing the fact that we have a full spectrum of emotions. God does too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And using those emotions, feeling those emotions as a part of our human experience, with the understanding that this is important for us to heal, right? That by denying ourselves that, we are hardening our heart, and we are making it harder for us to heal and repent and grow spiritually, right? I love in her ascent vision, Mary Magdalene gets to, I think it's the fifth or sixth bough of this tree of life that she's climbing, and Jesus is with her as a guide, and he says, "This is where you learn to heal yourself." And I think that that begins with being honest about how to feel ourselves, right? And like, and feel our own heart, feel our own feelings, and know that like Christ, that God, they are the safe place for us. Like they can hold all the space that we need. I love what you said. Like they can handle our mess. Like they can handle us yelling at them.
Absolutely.
They
Oh,
can
yeah.
handle us falling apart and having a temper tantrum sometimes.
Mhm.
Like God is so much bigger than that, and like they love us so much. And so if you're feeling that need to just release and let go, like God is there. Like they
Mhm.
can totally handle that. Well, Kaylee, thank you so much for this conversation. If you would like to learn more from Kaylee, you can find her at femininealchemist.com, which is your online school for the feminine. Your partner, Julie Dean, was on our show back at the end of December. I love Julie as well, so you can check us out there, or the Feminine Alchemist podcast, or of course, you should come to our women's retreat. Kaylee's going to be doing a whole hour on intuition, tapping in, and how to gain that revelation, some more kind of hands-on practices, like what we have discussed here, of how we can attune our hearts and our minds to God, and that beautiful feminine gift that we have inherited from our Mother Eve. So be sure to register for that if you haven't already. But Kaylee, thank you so much for a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.